In a quiet suburban neighborhood where every front yard looked like it was clipped straight from a landscaping magazine, and every house seemed to have been stamped out from the same mold, one home stood apart. It belonged to a free-spirited young professional named Ryan Mitchell. Ryan had recently inherited a modest house and a generous plot of land from his late uncle. But rather than conforming to the perfectly manicured lawns of the cul-de-sac, Ryan transformed his yard into a vibrant wildflower garden. It was an intentional decision to support local pollinators. Bees, butterflies, and birds found sanctuary there. His laid-back lifestyle and eco-friendly choices clashed hard against the rigid, uniform aesthetic of the neighborhood. And nowhere was that clash more evident than with his next-door neighbor, Deborah Langston. Deborah was the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood's standards. Armed with her ever-present clipboard and a scowl that seemed permanently etched into her features, Deborah made it her mission to enforce what she believed were the unspoken laws of suburban living. From the very first day Ryan moved in, Deborah zeroed in on him like a hawk. First, it was his wildflower garden, which she loudly decried as a weed infestation. Then, it was the color of his mailbox, a soft teal, that she deemed an eyesore. It was as if Ryan's very existence was an affront to everything she stood for. The final straw, however, came on a warm Saturday morning. Ryan was enjoying a cup of coffee on his porch, basking in the morning sun and listening to the cheerful chirping of birds flitting through his garden, when a police cruiser pulled up in front of his house. Confused, Ryan set down his mug and walked to greet the officer. "Good morning, officer. Is something wrong?" Ryan asked. The officer glanced at his notepad, looking slightly uncomfortable. "We received a call about a potentially hazardous structure on your property." Ryan blinked in disbelief and turned his gaze toward his old garden shed. It was weathered but sturdy, certainly not dangerous. That's when he realized Deborah had called the police on him. As the officer conducted a cursory inspection of the shed, Deborah appeared on the sidewalk, her arms folded, lips pursed in smug satisfaction. "I told you," she said to the officer. "This landowner refuses to comply with our neighborhood standards. That shed is an accident waiting to happen." Ryan couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all, but he also realized this was far from over. Deborah wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was determined to make his life miserable. At first, Deborah's campaign was subtle. Handwritten notes taped to his front door, all warning of his blight on the community. "Your property is lowering our home values," one note read. Ryan found the notes more amusing than threatening and even pinned a few on his fridge like badges of honor. But Deborah wasn't satisfied with passive aggression. Her next move was to escalate. When Ryan hosted a small barbecue for a few friends one evening, grilled burgers, soft music, and laughter wafting through the air, Deborah called the police. As the burgers came off the grill, flashing red and blue lights illuminated the driveway. "Noise complaint," the officer explained as Ryan approached him, perplexed. Deborah was already waiting on the sidewalk, arms crossed, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. "They've been disturbing the peace for hours," she claimed, even though the soft strumming of acoustic guitar barely registered over the quiet hum of conversation. The officer, clearly unimpressed, left soon after, but Deborah's smug smile lingered long after the cruiser drove away. And it didn't stop there. Deborah filed a formal complaint with the city, claiming Ryan's wildflower garden was attracting pests and was an environmental hazard. When the inspector arrived, they found Ryan's garden not only compliant with local ordinances, but beneficial to the environment. Deborah, livid at the setback, doubled down. One morning, Ryan awoke to find her on the sidewalk with a tape measure, meticulously documenting the height of his grass. Halloween came, and Ryan, an unapologetic fan of the spooky season, went all out with pumpkins, skeletons, and a modest fog machine. The neighborhood kids adored it. Deborah, however, treated the decorations like they were a felony. "These pumpkins aren't regulation size," she snapped, waving her phone around to take photos. "And that fog machine is a fire hazard." When Ryan refused to take anything down, Deborah called 911 again. Her obsessive behavior didn't go unnoticed. While Deborah had a history of nitpicking her neighbors, Ryan's refusal to roll over made him her prime target. The stress began to wear on him. Amusement gave way to irritation. He decided it was time to push back, but not with anger. Ryan's retaliation began with humor. He populated his yard with a battalion of lawn gnomes. each holding tiny protest signs. Deborah's Dominion, no fun zone, read one. Another proclaimed, beware, unapproved grass length ahead. The neighborhood kids laughed every time they passed. Even some adults smiled. Deborah did not. This is harassment, she shrieked one afternoon, standing on Ryan's lawn, fists clenched. Ryan, lounging casually on his porch, raised his coffee cup. I'm just expressing my creativity, he replied with a grin. The gnomes were just the beginning. When Deborah complained about his garden yet again, Ryan responded by adding even more variety. He placed informational signs in front of each type of flower, listing fun facts about their environmental benefits. He even gave the garden a formal name, the Deborah Langston Memorial Pollinator Sanctuary. Photos of the garden and its tongue-in-cheek dedication spread through local social media. But Deborah was relentless. She circulated a petition demanding Ryan be evicted for being a nuisance. When Ryan went door to door, he found something surprising. Most of his neighbors were just as tired of Deborah as he was. Many had been harassed by her in the past, but were too intimidated to stand up to her. Encouraged by their support, Ryan and his new allies began to build a case against her. Tom, the retired engineer next door, revealed he'd been recording Deborah's bizarre activities with his security cameras for years. She's been measuring people's lawns at dawn, Tom told him, showing footage of Deborah sneaking around with her tape measure. Sophia, a single mom 2 doors down, shared her own experience. She called animal control on my kid's puppy for barking, Sophia said. He was 3 months old and barely made a sound. Even Mrs. Ellis, the sweet elderly widow across the street, joined the cause. She tried to get my bird feeders removed, claimed they were an eyesore. Mrs. Ellis chuckled as she handed Ryan a batch of homemade cookies. It's about time someone stood up to her. Together, they formed a group chat, humorously dubbed Deborah Watch, where they shared stories, updates, and memes. Their gatherings became regular, friendly events. What Deborah had meant to isolate Ryan had instead united the neighborhood. But Ryan knew they needed something more concrete. Then came the breakthrough. Jacob, a quiet neighbor who rarely got involved, approached Ryan one evening with a stack of papers. I found these in my attic, he said. They're the original HOA bylaws. Half the stuff Deborah's enforcing? None of it's real. Armed with indisputable proof, Ryan and his neighbors planned their move. The showdown came during one of Deborah's infamous community standards meetings. Though unofficial, she demanded attendance. This time, however, the mood was different. Ryan arrived with Tom, Sophia, Mrs. Ellis, and many others. They were ready. Deborah strutted in, firing up her projector, ready to show a slideshow of Ryan's violations. Overgrown wildflowers, Halloween pumpkins, string lights. If we don't act now, Deborah declared dramatically, this neighborhood will fall into chaos. When she opened the floor for comments, Ryan stood up. Deborah, you've made a lot of accusations, he said calmly. But I think it's time we talk about the truth. He stepped forward and held up Jacob's documents. These are the real HOA bylaws. And guess what? There's no rule against wildflower gardens. No rule on mailbox colors. No regulation on lawn ornaments. Gasps filled the room. Tom played video footage of Deborah sneaking onto Ryan's property, measuring grass, and peeking over fences. Laughter erupted when Mrs. Ellis shared photos of Deborah counting bird feeders. Then the local police officer, called out so many times by Deborah's false reports, stepped forward. Deborah Langston, he said, you've made multiple false emergency calls. This is your formal warning. Any more, and we'll pursue legal action. Red-faced, Deborah stammered, but no one was listening. Her supporters had vanished. Her control was gone. The very next week, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. Her meticulously trimmed hedges began to grow wild, and her once immaculate mailbox now leaned to one side. As Deborah's moving truck pulled away, Ryan placed one last lawn gnome on the property line. It held a sign, by Deborah. The neighborhood celebrated with a massive barbecue. Laughter echoed down the street as families mingled freely. Tom played a highlight reel of Deborah's greatest hits on his projector. Sophia toasted Ryan. Mrs. Ellis handed out cookies. The community had finally found peace. And Ryan? He stood on his porch, sipping coffee, watching bees flit through his garden. The gnome still stood guard at the edge of the lawn. To peace and quiet, he said with a grin. And this time, he truly meant it.